Off Campus. I watched the show last week, like I think a lot of people did. And after finishing the show, I was genuinely excited to read the source material. Normally, I like to do things the other way around, let my imagination run rampant before I let someone else's vision alter my perception of the material. But this time, it's just the way things worked out. For me, the interesting question was, would the source material live up to the adaptation and the energy and excitement that it was able to create? I'm Farrell, and today we're comparing The Deal, a novel by Elle Kennedy, to its adaptation, the Amazon Prime TV show Off Campus. Hannah is a music major that has a crush on Justin, another student at Briar University. Garrett is a college hockey star with his sights firmly set on going pro one day. Only he hits a hiccup during philosophy class when a bad grade causes his GPA to plummet. With his ability to play on the line, Garrett seeks out assistance from Hannah to help him earn a passing grade. In exchange, the two will fake date in hopes that Hannah's crush will take notice of her newfound popularity. The concept isn't a new one. Fake dating is at the core of some of my favorite rom-coms. In fact, there's quite a few tropes in this story. Physically abused son fears that he'll grow up one day to be like his dad. Sexually assaulted woman struggles to overcome the trauma of her experience. But surprisingly, the adaptation handles these common tropes in a completely different way than the source material. In fact, there were a lot more changes from the novel than I expected to see. Let's talk about a few of the main ones that immediately stood out to me. The biggest difference I noticed early on was the change to the character Justin Cole. In the book, he's a football star, so kind of similar to Garrett Graham, except he's more quiet and reserved. Hannah kind of describes him as like having a great body, but also being interested in reading like Hemingway. But because this is a novel told from two different perspectives, we learned from Garrett that Justin is actually just one big poser, pretending to be that way in order to gain attention from women like Hannah. In the show, Justin isn't a jock, but a singer, the lead singer and songwriter for a local band. Hannah is crushing on him because, like her, music is a really big part of his life. And personally, I really like this change. In the book, once Hannah decides to date Garrett instead of Justin, Justin kind of disappears from the story until the very end when they decide to be friends. But because he's helping her write her song for the showcase in the TV show, he's around a lot more. And I think adds an extra, not necessarily like a hurdle for Hannah and Garrett, but almost like confirmation that their relationship is a healthy one based on how Garrett handles Hannah's friendship with Justin. Another massive change in the TV show is how both Garrett and Hannah's respective traumas are portrayed. Hannah in the books has already come to terms with her assault. She doesn't drink at parties and she struggles with things in the bedroom, but other than that, she seems like she's done a lot of healing, gone to a lot of therapy, faced a lot of issues that she was having after she was attacked. And in her day-to-day life, there's very little remnants of what she experienced. And we kind of see the same sort of thing with Garrett, where in the book, he's already written off his relationship with his father. And we learn pretty early on that he is going to be coming into an inheritance that his father doesn't know about and plans on fully paying him back for all of his dad's help when it comes to his education. So not only has Garrett distanced himself from his father, but he has plans to completely cut ties with him, even before he meets Hannah. That's already in the works for him mentally. As I said, this isn't the case in the TV show, where we see both characters still struggling with their past traumas more than their book counterparts. Hannah has severe mental blocks when it comes to writing and seems to experience PTSD when certain things happen in her life that remind her of when she was attacked, to the point where her past trauma seems to have come to almost define who she is as a person in a lot of ways. And the same is true with Garrett. Because of his relationship with his dad, he questions whether he loves hockey for himself or if he just has done it to try and please his father, which he admits is never possible. He's also afraid of turning into his father, becoming violent with the people that he loves the most. And you see him struggle with this throughout the series, more so on the back end. When it comes to these differences, I'm kind of a mixed bag on whether I prefer one over the other. I think the changes for Garrett are actually ones that make his character more multidimensional. Having him want to believe that his dad can change and be a better person, still almost being that little kid that hopes that his parent can learn to stop letting him down. You know what I mean? Hoping against hope that like he can do the work and become a better person, treat his new partner the way that he should have treated Garrett's mom. And also that fear of his anger growing out of control and being afraid to get close to Hannah because, or at least stay close to Hannah because he doesn't want to ever hurt her. That also makes him a more realistic character. When it comes to Hannah, I actually prefer the book version of her when it comes to her experiences and how it affects her day-to-day life. It feels more accurate to my own personal experiences. How Hannah in the book seems confident that she's moved on and done the therapy, done the work to deal with the main bulk of her trauma until something comes up and she's like, oh, I guess, I'm not quite as healed as I thought I was. And then, working on that and getting over that hurdle. But in general, her past trauma is not defining her day-to-day life. You know what I mean? The way that that was written in the book definitely resonated with me, at least. And I'm not saying that people don't have a similar experience to how Hannah is in the TV show. I'm sure there are women who even years later, still experience PTSD on a weekly basis, which is how it seems in the TV show for Hannah. Messing up my focus. And I just fear that, like, where Garrett becomes this more interesting, multi-dimensional character, with the writers exploring that trauma that he is dealing with, for Hannah, it almost, like, defines who she is as a person, which I didn't like. It felt like a lazy way to make her seem more interesting and multi-dimensional. But I feel like there was a way to have her struggle to write a song that dealt with the deepest, scariest feelings that she was experiencing without having her constantly having these moments of PTSD throughout the series. You know what I mean? I just feel like one is an improvement when the other is kind of just a crutch. And I understand why they made those choices. Like, you really needed Hannah to struggle with writing her song. And in order to have Garrett break up with her, he needed to be afraid of turning into his father. I just feel like one of those was more beneficial than the other. Speaking of breakups, that is another big difference between the TV show and the book. In the deal, Hannah's the one that breaks up with Garrett because Papa Graham comes to her work and threatens to financially cut Garrett off, putting his education and his career in as like a pro hockey player at risk. Personally, I did not enjoy this part of the book. It felt very out of character for Hannah to not talk to Garrett about it, to not think about it in a more intellectual way and realize that part of his dad's identity at this point is his son and his ability to be just as great, if not greater than he was, like living vicariously through his son's successes. And maybe because I got to know Garrett's dad a little bit better through the TV show than we do in the book, maybe because of that, I was a little bit more well-versed in his character and how I thought he would react if Hannah let him, essentially called his bluff. So maybe for a first-time reader, it would have been more believable that she chose to keep things from Garrett and break up with him. But as I'm reading it, I'm just like, no way. She would not do this. This is not for the character that she has been this entire book. This makes absolutely no sense. Like, Papa Graham is not showing up to all of those games if he's not highly invested in the trajectory of his son's career. You know what I mean? I think Hannah would have been smart enough to figure that out. So I think it's going to be no surprise to find out that I definitely prefer the TV show's version of their breakup. I mean, ideally there wouldn't be any breakup, but this is a very common thing that happens in rom-coms. You have to have the breakup right before, the end of the story so that they can have a reunion. So in the TV show, we have Garrett finding out that he's playing against Hannah's rapist while they're on the ice in the middle of a game, which I'll get to that later. But Garrett attacks the guy in the middle of the game and blacks out in the process of beating him up. And Hannah is pissed at him for jeopardizing his career for her, essentially. And as she's telling him this, she expresses that she was afraid for him, and Garrett hears that she was afraid of him, which terrifies him because that's what he's been afraid of this whole time. So he breaks up with her to make sure that he'll never ever scare her again, I guess. I think he says in the show, her being afraid of him reminds him of his dad's new fiance being afraid of him. And that's something that he never wanted to do to Hannah, was to scare her. And she tries to clarify and he doesn't let her, which is another one of those easily fixable miscommunications, but whatever. But I think his more nuanced relationship with his father definitely comes into play to the point where I think it's much more believable that this might have happened as opposed to the way that things play out in the book, that the breakup plays out in the book. It's not perfect, but it's definitely good enough to not ruin the story for me. Now, back to the fight that Garrett has on the ice. If you've read the book, you know that that is not how things play out in the source material. It's not the rapist himself, but one of his friends that testifies against Hannah during the trial. He's the one that Hannah bumps into after the game is over. And Garrett sees that she's upset and asks her if that's the guy. And she's like, no. And she explains who he is. Garrett goes and confronts him. And initially the guy's kind of terrified, but then he calls Hannah a name, which is when Garrett loses control of himself and starts beating the guy up and then accidentally hits Logan, one of his teammates, when Logan's pulling him off the guy. And he has a very similar reaction to what if I turn out to be like my dad? But in the book, Hannah reassures him and is like, no, she's like, would you ever hurt me if I cheated on you? And he's like, no, I just leave. She's like, exactly. This was a different circumstance. You were defending me, but the people you love, you would protect with your life, sort of thing. And Garrett very quickly gets over his fear and agrees with her that, yeah, she's right. I would never hurt you. The coach ends up finding out about it and he's suspended for one game, but overall that fight doesn't have that big of an impact on his life. In the show, though, that is not the case. While book Garrett establishes very early on that he does love the game, it's in spite of his father, despite his father's influence, he has understood for a long time that the game is important to him personally. Garrett in the TV show struggles with that question for most of the first season. And so when he gets in this fight during the middle of a game and attacks one of the players unprovoked, his coach suspends him for 3 games. And then when he gets in even more trouble because he has to go in front of the board in order to explain what happened at the game, they bring up the fact that he posted video of him practicing with a pro team. He explains it was just for fun and they invited him and it was actually after practice. It wasn't an actual practice, but they're like, well, tough titties, you essentially broke the rules and now all of your games that your team has won don't count. They're starting not even from square one. They're pushed to the end of the pack because now all their wins count as losses. And so after all that happens, the coach essentially tells Garrett, you need to figure out if you are doing this for you or if you're doing it, if you love the game or not. And there's this really cute scene where Hannah comes and visits him and he talks to her about it. And she points out that, even though he can't play for 3 games and even though things are looking really bleak when it comes to his career in going pro, that he's still showing up to practice by himself pretty much every day. He could be anywhere else, but he's chosen to be on the ice, essentially. So there's his answer that yes, he may have been obligated to pursue hockey because his dad made him, but in the process, at some point, he did fall in love with it for himself and for the people that he plays with. Essentially, don't do it for the family you were given, do it for the family you created, which I really like that message. I think that's really nice. But yeah, those were my main takeaways after reading the adaptation. After watching the adaptation and reading the novel, the source material. Of course, there's more changes that I didn't talk about, like the hands-off rule. I'm kind of really glad that they didn't include that, or they didn't have Garrett doing that in the TV show. There is a nod to it. So in the book, what happens is when Hannah breaks up with him because Garrett's dad threatens to take away his financial stability, essentially. She breaks up with Garrett, and Garrett can tell immediately that she's not being like truthful with him. And that even though she says she wants to date other people, he's pretty sure that if she did it just to prove that she was serious about wanting to break up with him, that she would ultimately come to regret it. So he puts a hands-off rule throughout the campus, essentially to save her from that inevitable regret that she would feel. It's not like the greenest of flags, but it's also not like a red flag in my opinion. But it would have been if the Garrett from the TV show had done that, especially because he's the one that breaks up with her. So I'm really glad that when she confronted him about it, he was like, I would never do that to you. I want you to be happy, sort of thing. And if that can't be with me, should be with someone else, you know. One thing that was present in both the book and the TV show that I don't quite understand is the crush that Logan has on Hannah. In the book, both Hannah and Garrett acknowledge it. In the TV show, it seems that Hannah's unaware, but Garrett has definitely noticed. I'm assuming that becomes relevant at some point in the future books. I have only read the first one, and part of me kind of wants to not read the other ones, but also like part of me does want to read them because I'm curious about Allie and what's his name, Dean? I don't have the character names right in front of me right now, so hopefully that's their name. That's one thing I'm not really great at is names. Even fictional characters in books that I read, especially because the book had so many different friendship groups that Hannah had. It was like really hard to keep people straight. I'm glad that they really narrowed that down for the TV show, because even with that narrowing, I still am struggling to remember everybody's name. But anyways, I'm curious to see what happens with Logan. I'm curious to see what happens with Allie and Dean. Let me look it up real quick. Okay, yes, it was Allie and Dean. But if I'm going to read the books, it's likely because I am very curious about their relationship, but also because I want to know if this Logan stuff ever turns into anything. Like, is this like a Tamlin and Rhysand sort of situation where she ends up dating him later? Or is it like a red herring where nothing ever really happens with it? I am quite curious, and I don't want to spoil it for myself. In general, though, I think it's pretty clear that comparing the book to the TV show, I definitely prefer the adaptation over the source material. There were some really smart changes that I think helped the characters feel more well-rounded. And of course, they also have the benefit of hindsight with, I'm assuming, most of the books already written. So even characters that are on the sidelines in the first book, it seems like it's going to be kind of like a Bridgerton thing where they're going to have their own time in other books to have their own relationships. So I'm curious to see what happens with that. I'm assuming that a lot of the things we saw from other characters are because they're relevant in upcoming books. Another thing I really liked about the TV show were all the like romantic movie references that you saw in there. My absolute favorite scene from the whole entire show had to be getting emotional just thinking about it. See if I can stop crying. When Hannah's singing to Garrett, and it was especially sweet because the actor Belmont Cameli reminds me so much of Heath Ledger, especially his performance in this show. Just oozing Heath Ledger charisma and charm, and the smiles, and it felt very familiar, his performance, because it felt so much like Heath Ledger. But I loved the nod to 10 Things I Hate About You, obviously. Okay, I need to stop talking about it because it's making me emotional. But yeah, while I really enjoyed the romantic cultural references that came about through the TV show, that was also something that I saw a lot of in the book, except instead of having that like nostalgic feeling to it, a lot of the times that it was used in the book, it felt more like a crutch, like a way for us to feel a certain way about a character or a relationship based on the cultural reference used. Like if you were to say to me that your roommate is basically Noah and Allie from The Notebook. Yeah, another Allie. Like, then I would know that they're just the most in love couple that you've ever seen, sort of thing. So instead of writing about it and telling me, giving me examples and letting me form that opinion for myself, a lot of time I saw a lot of like cultural references that were just kind of a way to make me feel a certain way without doing any of the work. You know what I mean? But I also know that there are other people that really love that sort of writing. So that is very much a personal preference of mine. The chemistry between the actors is probably what sold me most on this show. From what I could tell, I think Ella Bright was one of the youngest cast members. I think she did a really, really good job with the character. Like, I can't really imagine anyone else playing Hannah quite as well. I will say that she used a lot of what I like to call eyelid acting as a way to express emotion. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a time and a place for it. But at this point, it feels like an overused way to express intense emotion. Like, I think Vampire Diaries probably used up all of the allotment for fluttering eyelids because there was a lot of that in that show. But yeah, when I see that nowadays, it kind of takes me out of the moment. And I'm just like, nobody does that. Like in real life, I can't even do it. I'm not a good fluttering eyelid actress. Maybe that's why I don't like it, because I'm jealous. I can't do it. But yeah, other than that one bad habit, I think that Ella Bright did an amazing job with this character. Trauma and PTSD is not an easy thing to act. And I think for the most part she did it justice. For me though, the two standout performances were Mika Abdallah and Stephen Kalin. I hope that I'm saying their names correctly. I absolutely loved every scene that they were in. It maybe took an episode and a half for me to warm up to most of the characters, but that's pretty typical. But I could tell pretty quickly that Dean was going to be a special character just based on the performance that Steven was giving. That weight room scene between him and Garrett, Dean and Garrett, is obviously it's all over social media already. So I think a lot of people recognize what a special scene that was. What a great scene, an example of positive masculinity and respect for a woman's autonomy. You know what I mean? But yeah, I warmed very quickly to the relationship between Allie and Dean and enjoyed every single one of their scenes. And I'm really looking forward to season 2 because it seems like that season is going to be featuring them heavily, which is awesome. I'm really excited about that. And as I've already stated, my favorite performance of this show was definitely Belmont Cameli. I hope that this series catapults his career in whatever way that he wants it to. Personally, I'm hoping he does a lot more rom-coms. We are in desperate need of some good romantic leads. But at the same time, he's an actor that I would happily watch whatever he wanted to do. What's funny is that I actually rewatched Along for the Ride yesterday and totally didn't remember him being in that. I actually didn't remember the movie at all. I was watching, I think it was like the last couple seconds, and I was like, I don't know any of these characters. And even as it started, I was like, I watched this? Like, what? And then as soon as she got to like the beach town, I was like, oh, right. Yeah. Okay. And that's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. It feels really special. They've got some great experienced actors to play the parents, and then a cast of amazing young people that are, really take the material to the next level and make it feel personal and genuine in a way that feels rare. So if you haven't seen it, I'd check it out. Along for the Ride on Netflix. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I've talked for a long time, but that's what I've got when it comes to this TV show and the source material. If you've seen the show or read the book, let me know what you think. Do you think I should read the other novels, or should I wait until the second season comes out and then read the perspective source material afterwards, like I did with this first season? Or should I just dive headfirst and just read them all? Normally I would just do that, but I personally didn't really enjoy the writing style, so I'm not like desperate to find out what happens next, you know what I mean? And maybe it's just because I've read so many romance novels over the years that I have become a little bit more particular about the feeling that I want to get when I'm reading those. But yeah, let me know if you're a big fan of the books and if I'm wrong or missing out, or let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And yeah, I think that's it for today. So until next time, bye.